DJ's True Crime 2026, turn the lights down low, let the darkness mix. Midnight whispers on an old back road. Every secret's got a story untold. Cold case files and a smoking gun. Truth runs deep where the shadows run. Footsteps echo in an empty hall. Somebody's watching from behind the wall. Red string tied to a photograph. Broken clocks in a shattered past. Every clue's just one more fix. Welcome to 2026. DJ's True Crime 2026. Twisted tales and dangerous tricks. Every lie's got a heavy price. Roll the tape, let's roll the dice. Heartbeat racing, ticking ticks. Truth cuts deep like sharpened sticks. If you're brave, come take your fix. DJ's True Crime 2026. Headlines screaming in black and white. City sirens in the dead of night. Coffee cold on a cluttered desk. One more name on the suspect list. Footprints fade in the falling rain. Every witness recalls the same. A fleeting face, a shadowed mix. Another mystery in 26. Maps on the wall with pins stuck in. Where do we start and where's it end? Truth don't sleep and neither do I. Chasing ghosts that never die. DJ's True Crime 2026. Secrets buried in the politics. Truth is sharper than it looks. Hidden deep between the books. Turn it up, let the story stick. Every twist hits hard and quick. Stay tuned for the final fix. DJ's True Crime 2026. In the midnight city where the neon lights glow. DJ's on the mic and the whole world knows. From the streets to the sky where the blue flames fly. We ride together strong, never asking why. Hear the beat of the drums like a dragon's roar. Every step we take makes the crowd want more. Through the fire in the night, we stand as one. When the music hits hard, that's when we run. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Rising through the night, breathing blue fire, burning bright in the light. Hear the crowd scream loud when the bass drops hard. Stand up, stand proud for the Blue Dragon Squad. Dragon Squad. Through the smoke and the sound where the legends grow. Every beat we drop makes the whole place glow. From the underground vibes to the main stage flame. Blue dragons flying high in the game. Hear the thunder roll when the speakers pound. Feel the energy shaking the ground. Every soul in the room feels the spark ignite. Blue dragons rising in the night. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Rising through the night, breathing blue fire, burning bright in the light. Hear the crowd scream loud when the bass drops hard. Stand up, stand proud for the Blue Dragon Squad. Dragon Squad. No fear, no change, just the rhythm we ride. Blue flames in our hearts, got the squad by our side. When the night falls down and the music's loud, you'll hear the roar of the dragon crowd. We are DJ's Blue Dragon Squad. Hear the legend call. Blue fire rising as the shadows fall. Hands in the air while the beat hits hard. Forever we ride. Blue Dragon Squad.
Sweet boy Sebastian, where are you? The stars stayed up all night waiting too. The next morning your mama came up. You weren't there, your room was empty. Sweet boy Sebastian, where'd you go? Room was still left the same as it was. The whole world has been searching, but there was no evidence of where you went. The wind whistles softly in the night and morning. It hums your name and hums the song of I am the tiger. It's so quiet without your laughter and smile. Life gets harder and harder every day. Sweet boy Sebastian, where have you gone? Everyone has searched through forests and water and near your house with no sighting or sin. If you're hiding, come out and come back. Sebastian, your dad is worried, and so is the whole wide world. Sebastian, where are you? Please show us signs wherever you may be. We are your army, sweet boy Sebastian, so please come home. So please.
Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? Put a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me, or a 1. And Jacob, I'm going to throw the link down and you can come on up. Well, hello.
Hello there.
And for those in the bushes listening, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and also share my channel out into the YouTube algorithm to help me out. Thank you. And we will get started. So, the kidnapping of Sebastian Rogers, Part 2, Lies of Chris Proudfoot. We're going to watch this, and if one of my moderators can drop the Lore Lodge link in the chat, that would be very much appreciated.
Your day-to-day covered with Base 44 super agents. Your life is chaotic.
Of literally everybody involved. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. When I first began compiling information and researching the disappearance of Sebastian Rogers, the first interview I watched, which involved the Proudfoots, was done by Nancy Grace over at Crime Online. In broad strokes, the story that they told matched pretty well with what I was able to glean from the news while researching for the timeline, which was the first part of this series. Sebastian spent Sunday, the 25th of February, 2024, with his mother Katie and some relatives, came home, did his chores, and went to bed. The next morning, when Katie went to wake him up for school at around 6 a.m., she found that he was not in his bed. And then she found that he also wasn't anywhere else in the house, at which point she called her husband, Chris, who was working a construction gig in Memphis. The first search was organized that day, but that effort and those which followed failed to find any meaningful trace of Sebastian or to indicate where he may have gone. But after finishing the interview, even though it matched up with what I had been seeing, I just got the sense that something was off. Though at the time, I basically just chalked it up to their demeanor and the exhaustion that likely was influencing it. But then in the week that followed our first video on Sebastian's case, I went through a lot of interviews. I tracked down as many as I could find and did my best to analyze them and determine how it was that all these pieces of the story fit together. And they just didn't. I found numerous instances of Chris Proudfoot telling slightly different stories, some of which can only really be described as outright lies. And this, in turn, led to even more digging. I don't think that I possess the words to adequately describe the rabbit hole that I have been in since I was asked to take a look at this case a couple of weeks ago. It just goes so far beyond anything I would have expected.
And just remember, every 10 minutes, I will pause and talk about what's going on.
And I feel like every time I run into an answer, there's just a whole bunch more questions resulting from it. And on top of the already just confusing nature of this disappearance and this state of affairs, fact of the matter is a ton of what I guess could be described as evidence in this case, a ton of the hints as to what may be going on are basically just he said, she said, and very difficult to corroborate. And to give you an idea of the scope of what we're dealing with here, by the time I had finished putting together everything I needed to write this script, I had listened to about 18 hours of interviews and had written about 150 pages of notes.
Thank you.
And this presented another problem as I reached the let's write the script stage at around 10 p.m. on Friday, July 19th. I had absolutely no idea how to put this into a coherent essay. I mean, how do you tell a story when the people involved in it can't even keep their own accounts straight? I considered a few options, such as going through the interviews in chronological order, but with 150 pages of notes and interview transcripts, well, it would have been a long video. And while we have made some long videos, this would have made our 2.5-hour long documentary on the Donner Party look like a Vine. So I decided that the best way to organize this for both my own sanity and for the clarity as it's being given to the audience was to break this up into sort of the things that bugged me about watching the Proudfoot family's interviews. And initially, I was going to try and look at everybody all at once, but as I was going, I realized that this specifically needed attention. There was just something off about Chris and Katie Proudfoot's demeanor during a lot of these interviews. And then there were all of these weird inconsistencies within their stories and evaded questions. And at the end of the day, there were just several outright lies that they told. And while I'm certainly not done going through everything there is to research about this case, there is one thing that I'm willing to say with absolute certainty. And that is that Chris Proudfoot's version of this story is extremely questionable. And another thing that I can say with absolute certainty is that one of the reasons you get so many spam calls and texts is because big companies just cannot keep a handle on your data. So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, you can try Aura, the sponsor of today's video. As you may know, AT&T recently had a massive data breach which resulted in the personal information of around 70 million users being leaked onto the dark web. Those stolen logs not only contained records of everyone every AT&T customer has ever called and texted, but also of those users' social security numbers. So when things like this happen, Aura will alert you if they find that your phone number or other sensitive information has been compromised. And they're also very quick to give you fraud alerts when somebody tries to use that data to access your bank accounts, your credit cards, anything like that. In addition to that, Aura also comes with transaction monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, password manager, parental controls, and identity theft insurance.
We're almost at the part where we will be hearing KK and CP talk.
So you can get all of these things in one app at a very affordable price. Possibly the best innovation that I think they have is the fact that they have an AI-powered call assistant, which will scan, from what I understand, it will actually pick up unknown calls and see if it's a scammer or not before transitioning it over to you. Now, you might be asking how that works. Most scam calls, they only connect you to somebody after you've said something. So there's a little period where the caller can, but you get the point. My point is to say that it's not going to prevent you from getting calls from your friends, your doctor, things like that. And for those of us who maybe have parents who are not quite with it in the ways of technology, there's a great,
in my opinion, KK and CP,
a great feature, which is that it will scan text messages for spam and scams, so that when your mom gets a text asking her, to Venmo $500 to a Nigerian prince using this link, she doesn't do it. So if you would like to stop leaving yourself open to data breaches, you can go to aura.com/lorelodge to get a 14-day free trial. And they'll also tell you if any of your data has been leaked in one of these data breaches, which, they do happen. They're real. Once again, that is aura.com/lorelodge to get a 14-day free trial and get scanned to see if any of your data has been exposed. And now we're going to do a little exposing of our own. As I began to compare the Nancy Grace interview from March 25th with others that the Proudfoots had done in the weeks prior to that, one of the foremost things on my mind.
Hi there. Would you like
Mute the commercial.
Was how their demeanor just did not seem appropriate for the situation at hand. The first one I took a look at was from March 18th, conducted by YouTube creator Chronicles of Olivia, in which Chris and Katie were similarly unemotional, but it wasn't just that. When Katie would speak, she would typically look straight ahead, around, sometimes behind the camera at Olivia, but almost never at her husband. And throughout the entire interview,
KK doesn't look directly at the person that's speaking to her. KK looks all around. Raises her eyes up like she knows where Sebastian is. In my opinion, that is very odd. She makes up lies just like CP.
She just seems kind of emotionless. Chris, on the other hand, would speak looking directly into the camera while almost never looking at Olivia or even his own wife. And when he would express emotion, it was the wrong one. He would laugh, he would smile, he would seem almost giddy on certain occasions. And like I said, Chris and Katie almost never look at each other throughout this entire conversation. But when they do, it's just on a few occasions when someone's answering a question. And it's weird because they answer a lot of questions without looking at each other. It's just these 3 specific times. Like in one case, while answering a question about the events of Sunday the 25th before Sebastian disappeared, she paused, looked at Chris, and then says, we went and picked up our niece. Yeah, I got a call and asked if I could go and pick her up, and I did. And so we went and did that. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that I could compare the physical aspects of this interview to, because even when they had the ability to use video when calling into a show, they chose not to in most interviews. That said, there were still other videos of them, and while I
Sounds good, Linda. I'll check it out.
had been under the impression that Olivia's interview on March 18th was the first one the Proudfoots had done, I was alerted to an earlier one by the Sebastian Rogers subreddit, one conducted by WSMV News on the 5th of March. Where the Proudfoots had largely appeared emotionless during their interviews with Nancy Grace and Chronicles of Olivia, in this one for the news, Katie at least looked much more the part of the scared mother that you would expect to see. Her voice trembles and she noticeably rocks back and forth as she speaks about the incident. And this is something that I then went back to look for in other videos. And I found that in the Nancy Grace interview, the angle that she's sitting at makes it a little too hard to tell if she's moving back and forth. But in terms of overall movement, Katie remains extremely still in that interview, like very still. In the Chronicles of Olivia one, however, I did catch a gentle yet perceptible rocking motion on a few occasions. But that WSMV News video is very heavily edited, and the Proudfoots are really only shown on screen for a little over a minute. So you can't get much from it. Now, I'm not a behavioral expert, and the most I can say is that I've gone and watched behavioral experts talk about these interviews, but I have not gone through enough analysis yet, so I'll get to those in the part 3 of this series. But what I will say is that it wasn't just the demeanor. In addition to that somewhat strange demeanor displayed in these videos, some of the things that Katie said about the day before Sebastian disappeared struck me as odd. And in some cases, things were inconsistent between appearances. The first instance that caught my attention was the way in which Katie Proudfoot described the events of the morning before Sebastian went missing. And this was beginning around 58 seconds into that interview with Chronicles of Olivia. Katie tells Olivia, "We got up and, fun fact, I made breakfast that morning. We had a good time. We were laughing. We were joking. And he talked to the family on the phone during breakfast to brag. Aside from the choice of words.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a minute. KK saying the day before Sebastian disappeared that she woke up and made breakfast for him, spaghetti pancakes or whatever for Sebastian. Okay, yeah. Okay, so you had a good day. You had a good morning and stuff. What happened in the night though, KK? What made the change? What was the change that he all of a sudden went missing? He went poof right into thin air. You don't go poof right into thin air. You're not a ninja. So what happened that night that he went missing, KK? Maybe come out and tell the truth. And KK, was CP actually at work or was he really at home? That's another question I have.
Being a little strange, it struck me as odd that she included that little detail about her making breakfast. If it were just her and Sebastian in the house, and at no point has she ever talked about Sebastian liking to cook, who else would have made breakfast that morning? Details such as this can be evidence of a fabrication, though not always, as somebody with a keen eye for detail is likely going to give those kinds of responses. Someone who gives a very specific detail amongst a sea of vague answers, however, should be viewed with a little bit of suspicion. The other strange part was her saying that Sebastian had called his family members to brag, as if that was just something kids normally do on a Sunday morning. And even if it were something that kids normally do on a Sunday morning, which in my experience it wasn't, what was he bragging about? And while that comment about bragging didn't appear in the WSMV or Nancy Grace interviews, it did appear in a March 17th interview hosted by a YouTube creator called Duchess and her panel. In that appearance, Katie said much the same thing that she had said to Olivia, telling the panel, "Sunday morning we got up and I made a fun breakfast for us. Spaghetti pancakes. Google it, y'all." Once again, just weird phrasing under the circumstances. And also, who tells somebody to Google a recipe while talking about their missing son? I mean, at this point, Sebastian had been missing for a solid 3 weeks and there were no leads. And she's talking about spaghetti pancakes and bragging about how she made breakfast. In any case, she continued saying, "We FaceTime family while we were eating so he could brag because that's something he likes to do. And we were laughing and joking on FaceTime and having a good time." I do want to say I understand that Sebastian is on the spectrum and maybe this calling family to brag thing is something that he likes to do. But in multiple interviews, Chris Proudfoot said that his son was kind of struggled speaking to adults, even family members. But after this, she said, "We got a call to go and pick up our niece," which matches what she told Olivia in the interview that was released the day following this. I will admit that the phrasing here of who was being called, who was going to pick up the niece, whose niece it was, and who all was actually there along for the ride that day did send me down a rabbit hole trying to figure out, if there were any inconsistencies here, but it ultimately led nowhere. At least not in relation to the niece. But as I sifted through more and more interviews, I came across further inconsistencies in the narrative given by the Proudfoots. One of these was with regard to what happened between 9 p.m. when Katie told Sebastian to go to bed and midnight when Katie herself went to bed. According to the first version of the story given by Katie in the interviews from March 3rd, 5th, and 17th, she sent Sebastian to bed at 9 p.m. and that was the end of it. Other interviews, however, add a detail. In the interview on the 18th, Katie said he was doing something in his room because about an hour later I heard some noise and I was like, "I don't care what you're doing in there, but go to sleep." It's not proof of anything that this only appears on the 18th, but I do wonder why she would not include that detail in previous conversations. And that Chronicles of Olivia interview is much shorter and much less in-depth than either of the ones with Duchess. So I'm curious why it is that she gave 3 interviews, not mentioning any hearing a sound at, 10 p.m., and then suddenly she remembers it. And in another interview on the 20th, this time with the YouTube creator Smiley Stories World, she reiterated that statement with only a minor change to the verbiage. Instead of "go to sleep," it was "you're supposed to go to sleep," which would be absolutely no problem if not for the interview with Nancy Grace 5 days later. You see, Nancy asked specifically about what Katie described to her as a thud heard around 10 p.m., saying, you said, "Look, I don't care what you're doing in there. Go to bed. Is that right?" And this time, Katie said that her exact words were, "Bubba, did you fall out of the bed?" And he said, "No, ma'am." And I said, "Well, whatever you're doing in there, knock it off and go to sleep." Well,
just a minute. DJ also, the morning she made spaghetti pancakes and Sebastian called to break. He called his great grandmother and she took the phone to his grandmother. That is not to have it contact with. Yes, Linda, I heard about that, which is not good. If there's a no contact order for her not to speak to Sebastian, why did the great grandmother do that? That is also suspicious. I'm wondering about that. And I'm gonna try to see if I can find information on that. Like, not information, private information, but like if I can find anything on that.
I'm not going to say that this is what happened. It does almost seem like the story told by the Proudfoots changes as public opinion shifts. Initially, he just went to bed around 9, but then we have this additional detail about a thud heard around 10 p.m. And the thing is, people did not react well in the chats and the comments section to the fact that after hearing this thud from her autistic son, Katie did not go check on the boy. So then they go on Crime Stories on the 25th, and this time it's not just that she heard a thud, and it's not just that she said, keep it quiet. It's also that she asked if he was okay first, and that he responded to her. So she wouldn't need to check on him because he was okay. I will say in another interview, the excuse that she gave for not going to check on him at all that night is that he was a teenage boy and, you don't want to accidentally walk in on anything, as if knocking on a door is not an option. That said, in her defense, my little brother is on the spectrum in what appears to me to be at least a similar way to Sebastian. And I was asking my dad about it, and he did tell me that if he heard a thud from Liam's room, he wasn't going to think anything of it. So like I said, it's possible that her story was shifting with public opinion, but I also think that maybe public opinion was harping on the wrong thing there because, again, Sebastian's 15, he's not going to hurt himself falling off a bed probably. But in any case, this was not the only thing that changed between those early interviews and the Nancy Grace appearance, because the nature of what Katie was actually up to in those 3 hours before Sebastian went to bed and she went to bed is pretty unclear. In the interview from the
So, okay, considering Sebastian has a chromosome deletion, why didn't his mom go and check up on him if she heard a thump in his room on the floor? In my opinion, I don't even think he was home. If he was home and she heard a thump, knowing that he has fluid on his brain, she should have went up to check on him. Not just yell from downstairs and say, "Are you okay?" Oh, okay. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, she should have went up to check on him to make sure he didn't injure himself. But in my opinion, he did not even make it home that night. That is my opinion.
Third, Duchess, speaking to Katie, said, "You fell asleep on the couch about 10 o'clock, but you said that Sebastian went to bed at 9 p.m. And then you got up off the couch and you went to bed, and you said that was around midnight." And rather than allowing Katie to answer the question that she had just been directly asked, Chris cut in to explain what happened. And he began by saying, "There's actually a piece of, so to make something very crystal clear, so that way there's transparency across the board, me and the mom were on the phone at 9:43 or 9:46 in the evening. We stayed on the phone for quite some time." And this was followed by the unprompted information that the call logs have been verified by all the police departments, TBI included, even though it appears nobody had asked. So far as I can tell, this is the first time that anybody had told this part of the story to the media. So I just don't understand the need for a disclaimer there, as if it was a question that he had been asked on other interviews. But he continued saying, "We stayed on the phone. It was very lengthy. Mom did slightly start falling asleep while she was on the couch. I said, 'Hey, you need to wake up, put the dogs up.' And finally, Chris said, 'Now, mind you, that was right around midnight, just before midnight or right around midnight.'" So in this version, Katie got on the phone around 9:45 p.m. and then began to nod off around midnight. In the March 17th interview, the story is much the same, with Duchess asking Katie to walk me through exactly what transpired during that time before you went to bed at midnight. And again, I want to emphasize some of the wording used in the question, which was, walk me through exactly what transpired, okay? Because this is important. Katie told the panel that she and Chris usually talked at night and that Katie frequently started to fall asleep before they had hung up. And Chris would tell her, wake up, you got to go to bed, in this case, around midnight. From there, she says she got up and put the puppies up before turning in for the night. And then the next time I could find this period being discussed was during that Nancy Grace interview on the 25th, in which Nancy asked Katie what she was doing between 9 p.m. and midnight. And this time, Katie replied, I had been reading a chapter that I needed to, and I had been talking to my husband on the phone. And this was a detail that she had not mentioned prior. And as I said, Duchess asked her to describe exactly what transpired. So where did this detail come from, and why was it not present a week earlier? But Katie elaborated, I was falling asleep on him, so that's when he told me it was around midnight. He told me to go ahead and put the dogs up and go to bed, and that's what I did. Later.
In my opinion, I don't even think CP was at work. I think he was at home, and either KK or CP put the dogs to bed, if that's even true. I don't even think that's true, in my opinion.
In that same interview, Nancy would ask her to clarify what she was reading a chapter for. She said for school, but what? And she said that it was for a business administration course at DeVry. And along with the evolving details of that night, another thing that caught my eye was that phrasing of put the dogs up. It's weird because in that interview with Duchess and her panel from the 17th, Katie had told the panel that when Sebastian gets up to get snacks in the middle of the night, the dogs don't bark at him because he shushes them. So what is meant by put the dogs up? In order for him to shush them, he would have to walk past them. And according to Chris and Katie Proudfoot, in every interview where they discussed it, Sebastian's room was on the ground floor because they live in a ranch-style home that has a bonus room above the garage. And again, the reason that this is a problem is because in all of the interviews where the Proudfoots talk about the layout of the home, they tell everybody that Sebastian's room is on the south side of the home, and that the bonus room over the garage, well, that would be on the north side of the home. So if the dogs were being put up, that would imply that they were being put up in the bonus room. But Sebastian doesn't pass the bonus room to get to the kitchen. So what's meant by put the dogs up? I'll be honest, this could be a total nothing burger. It was just, she kept saying it every single time. It's one of the only consistent things she says in these interviews. And it makes no sense given the layout of the house as they've described it. They say that Sebastian has to walk past the dogs to get to the kitchen, but they also say put the dogs up. I know I'm repeating myself here. It's weird. Of course, none of this is really a smoking gun, but it is, in my opinion, enough to question the reliability of the stories being told, especially if other factors of the situation are considered, such as the manner in which Chris conducted himself during news. Throughout the appearances made by the Proudfoots, one thing I noticed is that,
and in my opinion, CP, when they've done interviews with news stations and whatnot, in my opinion, CP doesn't tell the truth, the full truth. And with them not looking at looking at each other when they get questioned, that's a little odd. Why do you need to look at one another when being asked a question by someone? Is it because you need that person to answer because that person was there? Or you don't want that person saying the truth?
Chris very much seemed to be in control of the narrative they presented, and he was the one fielding most of the questions. But then upon closer inspection, I noticed that he also frequently avoided answering questions. He would say something that would sound almost like an answer, but it would avoid the substance of what he was being asked. Now, Katie, it seems, did this too, but there was really only one instance that stuck out to me, and that was from the March 17th interview. I believe it was Duchess, but it might have been another member of the panel who asked, how many pairs of shoes does Sebastian have? Katie answered saying, I'm not going to tell you how many shoes he has, but I will say that all the shoes he has are accounted for. Beyond hiding some form of severe neglect, I cannot fathom a reason to completely withhold this information. While I could understand not giving an exact number because any deviation from that given number could engender suspicion from the internet, I don't understand not at least giving an estimation like, oh, he's got about half a dozen pairs. He has about 4 pairs. He has about a dozen pairs. But then after one of the panelists named Crystal said that she didn't quite hear Katie, Chris clarified that she said she would not divulge how many pairs of shoes she has, but law enforcement has accounted for every pair of shoes. And Katie then, without prompting or missing a beat, followed that up with what to me sounds like a correction, when she said, I have accounted for all of his shoes. Now, personally, I feel like the panel probably should have followed up on that, but they didn't, and Katie once again claimed that all of his shoes are still accounted for inside the house still during their appearance with Nancy Grace. Now, during that interview, as well as several others, Chris avoided, refused, or simply failed to answer numerous questions, and in some cases for reasons that I just find utterly bizarre. The first one I want to address came when Nancy was asking about the make, model, and year of the cars driven by the couple, and Katie answered that she drove a 2017 Infiniti SUV. Chris, on the other hand, simply said that he drove a diesel truck, specifically a Chevy, and did not give a year. So Nancy followed up and said, well, what was the year? And Chris said he didn't know off the top of his head, but he thought it was probably a 2021 model. Now, this wouldn't always strike me as odd, but in this case, Chris had given several extremely specific answers earlier in this very interview, as well as in an early interview from March 3rd, again with Duchess. Now recall, in that March 3rd interview with Duchess, he was able to tell her 2 very specific times that he may have gotten onto the phone with his wife, 9:43 and 9:46 p.m. And you know, most people under those circumstances would say around 9:45. And then earlier in that Crime Stories interview, he had told Nancy Grace that the time from his doorstep to his job site in Memphis was exactly 3 hours and 37 minutes. You know, leaving aside the fact that travel times are almost never consistent down to the minute across distances such as the 229 miles between Stafford Court and St. Jude's in Memphis.
Just a minute, let me read this. DJ, in my opinion, CP is protecting KP for what she did. In my opinion, because it was something CP wanted, because CP gave KP an ultimatum, either him or Sebastian, so he's protecting her for that decision, in my opinion. You may be correct. That would make sense, Linda. And I'm thinking the same thing. He doesn't want her sharing all the information.
It's pretty hard for me to believe that. One big reason for that is that Chris works in construction, which means that the specifications for his work vehicle are going to be extremely important to him. When purchasing a truck, he probably compared different brands and different model years and specifically chose 2021, especially considering that it seems like he's not struggling with money. That's also something I'm going to get to in part 3 because I have no idea where all of this man's money is coming from. And in addition to that bit, while anecdotal, I can't think of a single person I know who could not tell you the year of their primary vehicle. Aiden, what year's your truck?
1989.
What year's your Camaro?
2010.
Amanda, what year is my Altima?
2020.
What year is my Jeep?
2014.
I think I make my point. I think Chris knows what year his car was made. In the interview, Nancy didn't say anything that would suggest she caught this and kind of had the same thought, but the look on her face definitely suggested that. So she carried on to confirm where the cars were that night, and then something else weird happened. Katie confirmed that her car had been in the garage, while Chris said that his was in Memphis, but then Nancy asked, so there's only one car at the home, right? And Chris replied, there was actually a work vehicle in the driveway at the time as well, but it hasn't moved. We can't give out that information because we don't have permission from her work. And Nancy simply said,
I don't understand that. What?
And personally, after 2 weeks of doing nothing, I mean literally nothing but research this case, I feel that on a spiritual level. But Chris kind of responded about the make and model of the vehicle, like, saying, I can't tell you the make and model. You asked about the make and model of the vehicle. I'm telling you I can't tell you. And Nancy, seeming a little incredulous, asked, why is that? If it's out in the driveway where people can see it, why is that?
In my opinion, okay. So, CP, why can you not remember what year your vehicle was made in? That's a little fishy. Usually people know what year their vehicles are made in. Either you're not smart enough, or, in my opinion, you don't have brain cells. One of the two. CP, get your act together and start acting like an adult and pull your big boy panties up. Seriously.
Information. Now, Nancy didn't ask the name of the company. She didn't even ask what the company did. She just asked the make, model, and year of a car that was sitting in the Proudfoot's driveway in their possession. And Chris only answered, "We just don't have permission from her company to divulge that information," even though he didn't need it. It's also public information on LinkedIn that Katie Proudfoot works as an installation technician for Brinks Home Security and has since 2020. And Brinks Home Security, from what I'm seeing online, typically uses the Ram ProMaster City utility van. So again, public information. So, I mean, there, Chris did it for you. But Nancy pressed ahead, asking Katie what she did for a living. And of course, she said installation technician, did not say Brinks. And she also asked if anyone could have pulled into the driveway with that car there. And Katie said that it was at the back of the driveway, that the SUV was in the garage, and that yes, if somebody wanted to pull into the driveway, they could have done so. And she also confirmed, upon further questioning, that the only ways to get into the garage were either with a remote or a code, and that Sebastian had access to the latter. When it came to a number of other questions, Chris was equally opaque. For example, Duchess asked about Sebastian's medications during that March 17th interview, because Sebastian was diagnosed with 6q27 chromosomal deletion syndrome, as well as, I believe I read somewhere, ADHD. Chris replied that he would not be disclosing any of the medications that Sebastian was prescribed, which I could understand that to some extent in certain cases. But the bizarre part is that he said it was for HIPAA reasons. HIPAA does not prevent parents from disclosing the medication that their minor children take to journalists, and especially not in cases where that could be relevant information. And yeah, what medication Sebastian was taking may not be relevant to his disappearance, but why not just say that instead of lying and saying it's for HIPAA reasons? On top of that, I feel that having that information out in the open could be useful in the event that Sebastian, who, again, 15, intelligent, he's just on the spectrum, he knows what medications he's on. What if he goes to seek them out? If he did run away and he knows he's supposed to be getting medication, what if he goes to a clinic and tries to get it? If every clinic in a 100-mile radius knows what medications this boy is on, they might know to flag anybody who comes in who matches his description looking for those medications. The fact that Sebastian was on the spectrum makes me think that he would probably really care about his daily routine, and taking his meds would be a part of that. So if he chose to leave on his own, I do think that he would try to get access to the medicine he knew he was supposed to be taking. And in addition to that, I also think that had he left of his own volition, he probably would have thought to take his medicine with him. So to that end, I am curious if the police checked up on that. Did they go and see, were his daily medications still there? And it would also be good to know, is Sebastian able to get to his medication without assistance? Is this in a locked cabinet, or does he grab them out of his own bathroom sink every morning? But these were not the only times Chris evaded questions, and they were not the only times that he outright refused to give an answer. Because in the same interview, he was very cagey about how long he and Katie had known one another. One of the panelists I mentioned earlier, a YouTube creator who goes by the name of Cold Case Crystal, pressed the Proudfoots on that question during the March 17th interview, and this was because Duchess had skipped the question earlier on. And Chris immediately went on the defensive, replying, "So my question to whoever is asking that is, what does that have to do with the investigation of our son?" And Duchess seemed to agree, telling Chris that people came for her for skipping it and that she didn't think it was pertinent to Sebastian being missing. Chris replied, "I mean, it really has no pertinence to the investigation or the fact that our son is missing. But like I said, I'm respectful, I'm brash, and I'm direct to the point. To answer that person's question, I've been in Sebastian's life for half his life." And before I go into why this might in fact be a pertinent detail, I do want to note that Chris uses that exact same combination of words several times when answering questions. That brash, respectful, direct, and to the point. In that interview alone, he says this 3 times. And that's just in this one. He said it another 2 times in a different podcast. And I'm trying to see if there's a pattern here. I haven't determined if there is yet. But as to why that's pertinent, it's because the answer to that question may make Chris seem like not the best guy. I'll be going into more detail about this in part 3, but the quick version of Chris's previous marriage, which was his 4th, is as follows. Chris married a 35-year-old single mother by the name of Fernanda Gomez, who went by Nina, in 2016. This is while he was still stationed in San Diego for the Navy. And then she became pregnant in September of that same year. According to Gomez, Chris was not happy about any of this, and he was also physically abusive towards her 2 children from a prior marriage. Now, it should be noted that currently this is a...
In my opinion, CP isn't ever happy about anything. Saying that he was Sebastian's life for only a couple years. Since he's been a part of Sebastian's life for a couple years and was a stepfather to Sebastian, he really didn't act like a stepfather. He didn't act like a father at all. He acted like a complete douchebag. Sorry for my language. Yes, little Miss Sharon. Yep. You're right. You are right. And yes, people with autism, because I have autism as well. Yes, people with autism, it's hard for some of us to keep up with hygiene, yes. But at the same time, his mom hiding certain stuff, I don't think is right. Yeah, Sebastian has autism, but yet he probably took very good care of himself. In my opinion, the way she talked about him in different videos and stuff and in different interviews, saying how she made it seem like he was, aw, that is so cool. Yeah, KP makes it sound like that Sebastian was not smart enough. People with autism are very smart. In my opinion, if Sebastian could have told someone right away what was going on, maybe this case wouldn't have happened. He would have been with his biological dad by now. But with everything that's going on with CP and KP hiding everything out, that's how come he's not being found yet, because they want him found. Which is horrible.
He said she...
Oh, and also, for those in the bushes, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, and also share my channel out into the YouTube algorithm. Thank you. And we will play the video.
Said issue. I have yet to verify most of the details from either person's account. So again, just keep that in mind. Regardless, Faith was born June 2nd, 2017. And at that time, the marriage was in a very bad place. Chris was living in San Diego, but Nina, because during the pregnancy, their marriage had broken down a little bit, had moved back in with her parents in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She had lived in New Mexico when she and Chris first began speaking. They met through a dating app. And when they got married, she moved out to California to live in naval housing with him.
Just 1 minute. Let me read this. DJ, CP, and KP downgraded Sebastian a lot, in my opinion, and Sebastian does not deserve that. Exactly, Linda. And I feel like not just Sebastian, but in my opinion, there's other there's loads of parents that downgrade their special needs children, which is not right. Thank you, little Miss Sharon.
And it might occur to those of you who are familiar with military housing, and I checked this with one of our Discord members who just got out of the Navy, when you're married in the Navy, you get better housing and benefits. So without making any concrete accusations, I do have to wonder if it's possible that Chris married Nina Gomez and the 3 women before her solely for the benefits. This could explain why he went from marriage to marriage, why he married a woman he only met on a few occasions, and why he was upset when she got pregnant. It could also explain why he wasn't just upset about the pregnancy, but allegedly insisted that Nina terminate. If he was just marrying her for the benefits, he wouldn't want the strings that come with having a child. And again, I'll get into more of my reasoning on this one in part 3, but I'm skeptical of a lot of things here. And once again, not making any accusations, just giving potential explanations. After Chris and Nina's daughter, Faith, was born, however, they did try to make things work. He took some leave and he spent time living with her in New Mexico. And then after about a month, he went to go back to San Diego because, again, he was still in the Navy. But Chris, he was trying to be a good husband. He was trying to build a support system for Nina. So he suggested that she leave behind her entire family, who was helping her raise her child, and move to Hendersonville, Tennessee, where she knew literally nobody, so that his family could help raise the child while he was in San Diego. Nina did end up moving, though she told journalist Trevor Lee that it was against.
Sebastian did share some of his abuse with Seth's mom. I don't know if she told Seth. Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that, but but yes, I did hear something about Sebastian did say something to Seth's mom. Yes, I did hear that. You are correct. Good observation.
Against her better judgment, and said it was because she still hoped to make the marriage work. Earlier in the interview, she had said that when she met Chris, he was great, and then just after they got married, he changed very suddenly. So maybe she was hoping she could get that original version of him back. But according to her, only about a month and a half after moving, she had to take her elder daughter, Isabella, who I want to say was 7 years old, to the hospital at Vanderbilt. And while she did this, the other 2 children stayed with Chris's family. Her 3-year-old son, Noah, went to stay with Chris's sister, Melissa, while Faith, who was at this point an infant, went to stay with Chris's mother, Kathy. And this arrangement, according to her, may have all been a trap. She claims that when she returned home from the hospital, Melissa met her at her apartment and dropped off Noah, and then they went inside to wait for Kathy to bring Faith. But rather than Kathy showing up, a lawyer knocked at the door. If Nina's story is to believe, then that lawyer was Kathy's family friend, Patty Garner, who served her with a temporary protective order as well as divorce papers. There is just so much that is alleged to have happened in the months and years following this incident, but I'm still working through all the details and verifying things and reaching out to people involved, trying to figure out what's true and what's misremembered and what might be an outright lie. So I'll be getting to that stuff more in part 3. But at this point, you may be asking yourself a very fair question, which is, why is he talking about this and how is it relevant to Sebastian? Well, as it turns out, Chris has actually been vying for full custody of his daughter Faith since January of this year. All the while, he's been working out a deal with Seth to have Sebastian go live with him. And we know that Chris said that he has known Sebastian for half of that boy's life.
You're so sweet, Sharon.
As we know, Sebastian is 15 years old, which means he's known Sebastian for somewhere between 7 and 8 years. And that means that he has known Katie since at least 2017, if not earlier. And if it turned out that he had been dating Katie before he even filed for divorce from Nina, that could pretty considerably complicate his reputation and also get in the way of this custody case ongoing in New Mexico. Of course, Chris has insisted in multiple interviews that changing the primary custody of Sebastian has nothing to do with him attempting to relocate Faith, but others have not been so sure about that. Several questions were asked across multiple interviews about the timing of Sebastian going to move in with his father, which was supposed to be after this school year, and the timing of when Faith would hopefully be moving in, which what Chris wanted, according to from what I've seen from court documents and from Nina's statement, Chris was hoping to get Faith by the summer. And while I definitely have some further thoughts on this part of the whole situation, I still have some digging to do before I present this story in full. And that's partially because Chris actually did give concrete answers to some things. But the question there is, can Chris Proudfoot be trusted to tell the truth?
In my opinion, CP and KP will never tell the truth. That's how come it's all lies in every single video. They will never share the truth.
If the question is, can you trust Chris Proudfoot, then the answer is...
Oh yeah, I can already answer that question. No, in my opinion, I cannot trust CP or KP. There's that. There's my answer.
A resounding no. And I say that because, and I will admit that I buried the lead here, Chris Proudfoot didn't even tell the truth about whether or not he'd taken a lie detector test. On a full 3 occasions during the March 17th interview, Chris said or implied that he had taken and passed a polygraph. Now, of course, polygraphs are not admissible in court. They are more for investigative purposes, for ruling suspects in and out, and even then they shouldn't be used in isolation. But the important part here is he said 3 times that he took one. About an hour and 45 minutes into the conversation with Duchess on March 17th, he said, while talking about the situation with his ex, people have asked about interrogations and polygraphs. All this stuff has been done. And then Duchess clarified and asked if both Katie and Chris had taken polygraphs. And Chris responded, the results are passed. Just minutes later, Crystal asked him to clarify once again that they had both taken and passed polygraphs. And Chris replied, yes. And then almost 10 minutes later, the question was asked yet again, and suddenly Chris had a much more nebulous, very defensive, and much longer answer to the question at hand. He said, well, hold on. Somebody asked the question, was a polygraph taken and has it been passed? Yes. I didn't specify who or when, but I can tell you everything has been vetted completely. Polygraphs have come back as passed. Thing is, he actually did specify who had taken a polygraph twice, and in the case of when Crystal asked it, pretty definitively. She asked, have you both? He said yes. He probably should have stopped there, but he didn't, adding, so I'm confused as in why they're all wondering if myself, my wife, and the biological father took one, when a law enforcement agency has come out and told everybody, even in the TBI news link, if you guys hadn't read that, please go out and read that. That's got a lot of great information in it, especially it's probably the most up-to-date information. But they will even tell you at this point in time, they have no reason to speculate foul play or anything on the parents. Everybody.
In my opinion, CP don't even need to get faked till Sebastian is found, in my opinion. Exactly. I don't even think he needs kids in his life right now at all, in my opinion. I don't think he's fit to be around kids at all. And that's just my opinion. Kids need to be kept safe. And in order to be kept safe is to not be around KP or CP.
He's been extremely cooperative of anything and everything they've asked of us. Now, the problem is that the TBI website that he referenced didn't say that. The most recent update to that website as of the date of this interview had been posted on March 17th. And while it did say that the family had remained cooperative, it absolutely did not say that they were cleared. I also think it's important to point out the difference between everybody's been extremely cooperative and the family has remained cooperative. Those have different connotations. But what the TBI report actually said in regards to, whether or not foul play was an issue was at this stage in the investigation, there are few clues to indicate what happened to Sebastian or where he may be. There is not proof at this time that there is a criminal element involved in his disappearance. But also, there is not any proof that there is not a criminal element involved. So agents and investigators are reviewing any possibility at all that may indicate where Sebastian is. That, however, is not the lie I'm referring to here, even though it is a blatant lie. The lie we're focused on here is the one where on the 25th, just under 8 minutes into the conversation, Nancy Grace asked point blank, okay, have the two of you taken a polygraph? Katie replied, I have, while Chris replied, I have not. So, and that's a different answer from the 3 he gave to Duchess's panel. And he elaborated, I've offered and volunteered on many occasions to take a polygraph, and I was told directly by law enforcement that because of my whereabouts, I did not need one. I want to also say that at no point have I stumbled across any confirmation from law enforcement that they did confirm he was in Memphis that night. Haven't come across it. It might be out there, but I sure haven't seen it. If somebody has it, send it to me and I'll factor that into part 3. I would love to know, honestly, please, because knowing that he was in Memphis would knock some stuff off the table for me and really help me to organize things. That said, I have a few reasons to believe he may not have been in Memphis. But anyway, later in the interview, Nancy came back to that and asked Chris, if I were to set up a poly for you, would you take it? To which he replied, name the place and time, ma'am, I'll be there. This, it seems, was also a lie because Nancy Grace says she followed through on it and Chris didn't hold up his end of the deal. Speaking to Crime Online journalist Dave Mack in an episode of Crime Stories posted on April 4th, 2024, Nancy revealed that she had set up a polygraph, a very well-respected polygrapher, a place, and a time. However, according to her, Mr. Proudfoot tells us that he has been instructed by the TBI not to be on with us today and ask for help finding his son, his stepson, and not to take a polygraph. Nancy said she's never heard of that, and after Chris falsely implied that he had been cleared by the TBI, I'm hesitant to believe that this instruction came from the TBI at all. And Nancy seemed to agree with this. She said that as a prosecutor, as an assistant district attorney, she loved it when people took polygraphs, whether they were lawyers, witnesses, targets, criminals, plaintiffs. No matter what their relation to the case happened to be, she loved it when they took polygraphs. And to me, this statement kind of implies that this is not the kind of advice that law enforcement would give. However, it is exactly the kind of advice that an attorney would give. Now, of course, in that interview with Duchess and her panel on the 17th, Chris also did say that he had not retained a lawyer. But why would he need to do so on record when he has Patty Garner, Esquire, as a family friend? And I want to be clear here, while I said I have to verify some things about the Nina Gomez story, I have verified that Patty B. Garner was the attorney here. She did represent Chris Proudfoot in those hearings about Faith back in September and October of 2017. And Nancy wasn't done. She went ahead and she asked Dave Mack, didn't Mr. Proudfoot, Chris Proudfoot, Sebastian Rogers' stepfather, didn't he tell us he would take a polygraph anywhere, anytime? Isn't that true? Dave confirmed, and Nancy added, he also told us, should I believe him or my lying ears, that he has never taken a polygraph before? Didn't he?
In my opinion, CP and KP did not take no polygraph test. And even if they did, they lied through the polygraph test. And they worked their way around to make it look truthful.
Tell us that. Once again, Dave confirmed this to be the case, and Nancy then asked him, did he not tell another outlet that he had already taken a polygraph and passed it? There's definitely a bit of showmanship here, but in this case, I think it's warranted and it's appropriate because it does a great job of illustrating how blatant this lie is. And, from there, Nancy invited Dave Mack to explain for us. And Dave basically said everything I've already pointed out here. At which point, Nancy threw this over to Seth, who was actually also sitting in on the call. And she asked him, Seth, I don't understand that because he told me he would take a polygraph if I set it up. I set it up. I went through a lot of hoops to get it set it up. One convenient to him in the area where he says he's working. Then he wouldn't take it and blames the TBI. So now I find out he's told other outlets he's taken one and passed. Do you know the truth? Also, just really quickly, because I forgot to put it into the script, but it is relevant. Basically within 2 minutes in the Nancy Grace interview, he said that he and Katie had left because, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this one as well. Sometime between that March 18th interview with Olivia and that March 25th interview with Nancy Grace, they left Hendersonville in an RV to go to Memphis. And again, this is the kind of thing where it was inconsistent because in interviews, they told, I think they had actually left by the 20th. In the Nancy Grace interview, they said that they had left so that Chris could go back to work. But in that same interview, when Nancy Grace asked Chris where he was working, he said that it was up in the air. So the question is, was Chris employed by the construction company working at St. Jude in Memphis, Tennessee on the 25th of March 2024, or was he not? Because from what he tells Nancy Grace, it's Schrodinger's job. But back to the polygraph, Seth, when asked he knew the truth about whether or not polygraphs had been taken, said that he did not know, and then he contradicted Chris's claims again by telling Nancy that he also hadn't taken a polygraph when Chris said that he had. And remember, on that panel with Duchess just a week before this, he said that all three of them, he initially said that all three of them had taken and passed a polygraph. And then he said, he and Katie definitely had. And then there was that weird kind of cagey response where he said that the TBI had cleared him rather than just straightforwardly answering the question, which honestly, I mean, the fact that rather than say yes or no to the question of whether or not he'd taken a polygraph, he went and obfuscated it and then goes on to say, oh, and also, just so you guys all know, the TBI says that we're all cleared. Like, you really don't need to be asking these questions. Like, that just comes across as so incredibly defensive to me. I would be considerably less suspicious of Chris Proudfoot if he had simply said, no, I have not yet taken a polygraph. In any case, Seth elaborated on why he had not taken one yet, and he said, because they have my location and whereabouts, but I still volunteered, and if somebody wants me to take one, that's something on my own free will. But he also said that at no point had the TBI instructed or advised him not to take a polygraph. Now, I haven't gotten too far into analyzing Seth and his claims and his background yet, and I don't want this to sound like I'm saying any individual involved here is a saint. But my only point here is to say that I think the evidence is quite clear that Chris deliberately lied about whether or not he'd taken a polygraph and why he hadn't taken a polygraph. But Nancy wasn't done here either, quickly moving along to another hot topic of conversation that, to be honest, I had to save for this part of the video for narrative and structural purposes. But that was the admission by Chris Proudfoot that he had hit Sebastian with a belt. Now, you may be asking why it is that an admission qualifies as a lie. And the answer is that even when Chris Proudfoot's telling the truth, he's lying. To give you some background here, to explain my point of view, in their March 25th appearance, Nancy had asked, I want to find out about Mr. Proudfoot hitting Sebastian with a belt. What happened? Katie initially tried to answer this question, saying that was actually several years ago, before being cut off by Nancy, who insisted that Chris answer it. Chris, after...
In my opinion, when CP hit Sebastian with the belt, that is just horrible. That is abuse. And plus, not just the belt, the pressure washer. That can injure people. Especially doing that to a kid. Someone with disabilities. Yeah, no, I'd be frightened too. CP should not be allowed around kids ever. I don't even think CP and KP did the polygraph test. In my opinion, Seth did, and Seth passed the polygraph test.
Saying that he thought the question was addressed to his wife for some reason, considering she said Mr. Proudfoot, said Sebastian had gotten in trouble. He got caught lying. And I asked him, I said, hey, you've got to have a punishment for this. He says, yes, sir. And I said, okay. So I gave him a swat with a belt on his buttocks on the outside of his clothes. One swat. Nancy had asked him if this was the first time that he had ever hit Sebastian with a belt, and Chris responded, yes, ma'am, the one and only time. Now, you can probably guess where this is going at this point. Nancy asked when this occurred, and she was told, years ago, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, Linda.
That wasn't enough.
Sure.
She pressed him. She said, how many years ago? 1, 3, 10? And the question that was given was at least 3. And then finally, she had asked how all of this turned into a CPS complaint. And Chris said it didn't turn into a CPS complaint. And this, of course, is also a lie. And in the episode, Nancy had played those sequences from her earlier interview. So leaving those flashbacks behind, Nancy returned to the present saying, but didn't it? I've got a lot of things I need to dissect very quickly. Dave Mack, you and I have been scouring the internet and speaking to various witnesses. Mr. Proudfoot tells me to my face that he hit Sebastian with a belt. This is an autistic boy. An autistic boy. She paused, and I'm pretty sure in this same interview she said that no child should be hit with a belt. That was wrong, but it's even more wrong to hit an autistic child. And she said that there was actually a specialist she had on hand in the studio that day to talk about this. And I'll be getting to that aspect in part 3 as well. I know this might seem really arbitrary, but I promise it will make sense in a week. But anyway, after, mentioning that bit about the specialist and wanting to talk about how autism and corporal punishment might not vibe well, she said, help me, Dave. I'm hearing that it happened years ago. In both those quotes where you heard Chris Proudfoot speaking, he said several years ago. Then he says, when I press him on that, he says at least 3 years ago. However, he stated a different scenario to a different person. Explain, Dave Mack. And Dave told her he did a YouTube interview. And in that interview, he described the actual belt whack. And in your interview, he said that the belt whack did not lead to a CPS call. However, in his other interview, and before Dave could finish, Nancy interrupted. asking him to give her Sebastian's age at the time of the beating in question, and reminding the audience that Chris said 3 years ago. And Dave caught on real quick here and said, he said in another interview that the 15-year-old boy was upset. He was in trouble. He said he's 15 and he's in trouble. He was describing why Sebastian was mad about the punishment, the whack, and he said, 15-year-old boy, punishment. Now, that's not 3 years ago. That's within the last 12 months. And as noted by Dave seconds later, Katie had agreed with Chris that the beating was, in fact, at least 3 years ago. And then Seth chimed in with something that added a whole new level of importance to this aspect of the story. The fact that Sebastian had only turned 15 on December 7th, 2023. And considering that in the March 25th interview, Chris had told Nancy Grace that he had not been home since the first weekend of February, that means that this belt whacking incident happened sometime between December 7th and the end of January. You see, Dave Mack had drilled down and came to the exact same conclusion that I did. Chris Proudfoot told two distinctly different stories about beating Sebastian with a belt and lied about how many times CPS was involved. As Dave said, Chris told Nancy that he had hit Sebastian with a belt exactly once 3 years ago and that there was no CPS called. However, speaking to Smiley Stories World, Chris had said that after the incident which occurred when Sebastian was 15, a CPS agent had come to their door while they were sitting down for dinner that night. And after listening to the story he told there, I tried to write out a summary format of it, but I feel like I just need to read you what he said and go piece by piece. Sebastian went to school one day because we were at the house, he got in trouble, he didn't have a belt on. I was like, where's your belt? And got it, and whack, kind of got him. And while Chris does not elaborate here on why Sebastian was in trouble, the comment that Sebastian didn't have a belt on would suggest that he was in trouble because he didn't have a belt on. To be honest, after everything I've read so far about Chris, it would not surprise me if that's all it took. But Chris continued, so he goes to school, he tells the teacher, and they're mandatory reporters. So the teacher reports it that afternoon. CPS shows up to the house while we're actually sitting down to eat dinner. Now, for this part, the important thing to remember is that Chris told Nancy he only hit Sebastian with a belt once 3 years ago. And I know I am repeating myself a lot, but it's because of how important this aspect is. Chris told Nancy he hit Sebastian.
In my opinion, Child Protective Services should have removed Sebastian from that house from the beginning to make sure none of this happened. Child Protective Services should also be held accountable. Now let's finish off this video and then we will end this out for the day.
With a belt once 3 years ago, no CPS, right? But referring to this time, he says, now mind you, 15-year-old child, he's not real happy because he's in trouble, so he's being punished. So he shows, he makes the report, they come to the house, and the lady who comes to the house is the same lady we've had. She's had a case before. So not only did Chris lie about having used a belt, having admitted to using the belt on both occasions, but he also lied about how many times a CPS agent was called. And he said now the case that was before was something that didn't even happen. And it's like 3 stories, it was shoved into one. When they finally got it debunked, they were like, oh, he got it so mixed up in telling one story. It mixed into all 3 and it caused a commotion. The fact that there was no effort made to clarify what the stories were, explain what the truth was, just, no, it didn't actually happen, and you should believe me, does not make me want to believe him. When I think about what Chris has said, the fact that he said that the time before, when Sebastian was 12, he hit him with a belt exactly once, and as we now know, that was a lie. And the fact that he now says that there were 3 stories shoved into one the previous time makes me think that, in reality, the previous time wasn't just the one time he hit him with a belt. It was probably 3 separate times. And again, using his own words here. But he continues, well, they canceled that out, so the one on me, she shows up, and I say, hey, how you doing? It's her again. And initially, I didn't even catch this part, but Chris says, so the one on me, which could imply that those 3 stories Sebastian told the first time, maybe Chris wasn't the one responsible for all of them. And then the question is, who was? If we're going based on what Chris and Katie said in all of these interviews, which is that Chris really doesn't interact with many adults aside from them, it could really only be Katie, or potentially another member of the Proudfoot family. But he says, she's like, oh, hey, she's, hey, I'm already don't. She's like, don't tell me anything, but I'm going to tell you what I know happened. And I said, okay. She goes, boom, boom, boom. She told me exactly what happened. I said, yes, ma'am. She goes, oh my God. I say, yes, ma'am. It may be because I was writing this segment at 5 a.m., but none of that makes sense and just sounds like nonsense he was coming up with on the spot so that he didn't have to explain what actually went down. You might be able to sense the...
Just 1 minute. Let me read these. It was in the divorce decree. No one was to use corporal punishment on Sebastian, so there's another reason why CP and KP should be locked up, in my opinion. Oh, yeah. Definitely agree with you there. I heard about that as well. In my opinion, all three adults failed this long. Man. CPS should have removed Seb, in my opinion, as well. Yep. Exactly.
Irritation and anger within me as I go through this, it's there. And, either way, whether that was nonsense or not, I don't like the rest of what he said at all. Because he goes on to say, this is how it's been. Sebastian thought by telling on me, making it sound like I was so horrible that I was going to get in trouble over something stupid. It was like, no, Sebastian, you got punished, man. And I want to, again, Chris did not elaborate on why Sebastian was being punished. And, is this just him not telling us why Sebastian was being punished? Was Sebastian being punished for not wearing a belt? Did Sebastian know why he was being punished? I mean, considering Sebastian's autistic, he's going to need to know why. This is not, the kind of thing where he would be pretending not to know. If he's saying, I don't know why I'm being punished, he's probably telling the truth. So, if he didn't tell the kid why he was being punished, that's a whole new level of abuse considering the autism. He continued, you got punished. And he was like, but, and I was like, you got punished. And the lady took him outside. She goes, Sebastian, just because you get in trouble and you get punished, you need to understand when you go and say things about people and you lie and you fabricate things and you make it sound worse than what it is, sir, you can get in trouble for that. So we had that happen, and that lady was like, I am so sorry. I said, no, he's just a child. He's upset is what it is. I'm okay with it. He set that back down the dinner table and was like, see, eat your food. And we went back, and everything's been fine. So, just the picture of temperance from a man who beats his autistic son with a belt and doesn't explain why. I mean, if we're being real here, because, again, there's no question about whether or not Sebastian was hit with a belt by his stepfather. So if we're being real here, Chris could have absolutely nothing to do with Sebastian's disappearance, and he would still be a massive piece of shit. And I do have to wonder if these interviews and these records were presented to the New Mexico family court handling his child custody case, what court would give this man...
Okay, if she took Seb outside, how does CP know what she said to Seb? Exactly. So in my opinion, I don't even think CP was at work that day at all. It's all a bunch of lies.
Custody of a child. I wonder if that's made it there yet. And then there is the final indisputable lie told by Chris Proudfoot, which he has gone to as a refrain over and over again. And that is that dogs hit on a scent of Sebastian outside at the house. There is not much to be said for this one, to be perfectly honest, aside from the fact that Chris just repeatedly has said this to be the case, whereas reporting from WVLT, as well as a few other outlets, have all reported the exact opposite, that law enforcement has said on multiple occasions that dogs did not hit on the home, that they did track a scent into the construction site, but it was a false lead. But yeah, no hitting at the home. That has not happened from anything I've read. And if dogs found absolutely no scent of Sebastian, who would have, as his parents said, walked out of the house barefoot hours after he went missing, I find it very difficult to believe that Sebastian left that house on foot. And since Sebastian obviously didn't drive himself away, that means that there is one possibility here, and that is that Sebastian was kidnapped. The question is by who? So what I would genuinely love to know at this point is, why is it that the Sumner County Sheriff's Department has not simply come out and said what I think we can all see very clearly? Chris Proudfoot is lying through his teeth.
In my opinion, yes, CP is lying through his teeth. And KP was the last one who was with Sebastian. So, KP, where's Sebastian? Bring him back home wherever he is, to his biological dad's house, which is Seth.
Throughout this episode, there has been so much more that I've wanted to say, so many more things that I've come across. But the fact of the matter is that this is not one of our typical cases. This is an open missing persons case involving a child who very well may still be alive. And if he is, the last thing I want to do is spread some kind of misinformation that causes something bad to happen to him. I think I said in this video that I do have a hypothesis about what happened here. And if I'm right, then there's a very real danger of something bad happening to Sebastian. But if I'm wrong, I don't want to distract from legitimate leads by causing a social media frenzy over what I think may have happened. To that end, I'm holding back some aspects of my research. I'm holding back some of the conclusions I've come to until I can share my findings with law enforcement. And I'm very grateful to be able to say that on this case specifically, I have some very powerful allies. I have already begun that process of getting in contact with law enforcement, and I'm going to be spending the next week going through more interviews, more information, and also taking a closer look at Seth, Sebastian's father. Like I said, right now, I think I have a pretty strong hypothesis, but I need to make sure that I'm not missing anything important, and that means more research. As it stands, however, I'm very interested in a few specific questions, given what I uncovered when I put this episode together. First of all, as I said a few times, I currently have reason to believe that Chris was not in Memphis the night of the 25th, and I have reason to believe that he may have been lying about returning to work there as well. But before I can make any claim in either direction, I need to square a few things. Another is with regard to a temporary restraining order filed against Seth by Katie during their 2016 divorce, which Chris, despite knowing about the divorce, claims to have no knowledge of. And finally, at least for now, I'm interested in seeing what else I can dig up regarding the suggestion that Sebastian was moving in with his dad because Chris was trying to get custody of Faith. And that for some reason, Chris felt that to get Faith, he needed Sebastian out of the house. As always, I genuinely appreciate the commentary and the critiques that you guys give in the comment sections after these videos. So if you think that I have missed anything or that I'm not understanding something properly,
Let's read this one. I like Seth, don't get me wrong, but by being so passive, cause CP to be able to overstep his bounds as step-parent, therefore isn't protecting him from him in long run. No offense, just a fact in my opinion. And yeah, that's all right. You can have your opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. I agree with you.
you have context, if you're from the area, or if you just have a tip you'd like to give, please leave it in the comments. Because I just have this feeling that Sebastian is still alive out there, and he needs the kind of help that only a community like this can give. I also want to take a brief moment to address true crime creators, because I feel like our channel is adjacent to that genre, and to say that, please be careful with this case. People in our space rarely have all the facts, and even more rarely do they have all of the time required to go through them. And right now, what matters above all is finding Sebastian if he's alive and getting justice for him if he's not. Lastly, to Brazen Cyrus, I just wanted to say again, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Thank you for all of the support that you have offered. And thank you for caring so much about something that most other people in your position would simply cast aside and ignore. You do a credit to your city, to your community, and to your family, and you should be proud of that. As for us, if you want to support what we do here at the Lore Lodge, whether that is trying to get to the bottom of unsolved missing persons cases, debunking conspiracies, or looking at weird events in history, you can do that by subscribing on Patreon or here on YouTube for just $1. That will get you access to a monthly exclusive stream called Liquored Lore. That is Aiden and I's Drunk History clone, where we have a few drinks and talk about something silly from the past. Also, once we do eventually have ourselves on a better schedule, I'm hoping to offer, ad-free videos to those sides of the service, but not yet. In addition to that Liquored Lore segment, we're also looking to start uploading ad-free versions of these videos to those membership services. Honestly, that works out better for all of us. It is no ads for you, and we make more off of your view than we would if you were just watching the video here. Like, I'm serious. 25 cents.
Okay. Well. I think that is all for today. I'm going to set another stream for tomorrow. I hope everyone that was watching from the bushes liked my stream today. And for those in the bushes, please, on your way out, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and also share my channel out into the YouTube algorithm. And also thank you to my moderators and subscribers for coming out today to watch my stream. I absolutely appreciate that. I appreciate everyone here. We're all like family. And thank you, Linda. And until next time, peace. Thank you, Michelle.